Hello, my name is Michael Grayson, 34 years old. I'm a tech engineer living alone in a compact apartment in Denver with a view of the Rocky Mountains. I once thought I had found peace, but some wounds never heal and some phone calls pull you back to the past you've tried to bury. I stood at the door of my apartment, phone in hand. The screen lit up with a short message from my mother. "I'm sick, Michael. Can you come home?" Just 10 words, but they cut like a knife, slicing through the wall I'd built between myself and my family over the past 2 years. I looked out the window, the snow-capped mountains faintly visible in the twilight. Denver had been my escape, the place where I rediscovered myself after leaving my father's company. But now, I knew I had to return. Not for my father, but for my mother. The only person in the family who never saw me as a traitor. I packed a few clothes, stuffing them into an old backpack. Before closing the door, I glanced back at the apartment. A simple, clean space with a few technical books on the table and a guitar I rarely touched. It was my world, separate from family drama, from whispers of money and power. But the past, like a predatory beast, always finds a way to drag you back. The drive from Denver to Boulder, where my family lives, takes only an hour, but each mile felt like a lifetime. I turned on the radio, trying to soothe my mind with old country tunes, but memories surged like waves. My father, Walter Grayson, 63, is a tall man with a voice that rumbles like thunder. He's the head of a mineral mining company, a small empire he built from nothing. To him, the company isn't just a business, it's his honor, his lifeblood. And me? I was once his right-hand man, the eldest son he expected to take over everything. But it all fell apart 4 years ago. I discovered that my father's company wasn't just mining stone and ore. It was mining greed. They destroyed forests, polluted rivers near the mines, and worse, they evaded taxes through accounting tricks that I, as the engineer in charge of data systems, stumbled upon. I confronted my father, not in anger, but with hope that he would stop. "We can do better, Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "We don't have to destroy everything to make money." He looked at me, his eyes cold as steel. "What do you think you know about this world, Michael? Do you think businesses survive on ethics?" That was the first time I realized my father was no longer my hero. He was a man consumed by ambition. I left the company soon after. No shouting, no accusations, just quietly clearing my desk and disappearing. My father called it betrayal. He never forgave me, and I never sought his forgiveness. My younger brother Tyler, then 27, chose to stay. He was the company's financial manager, a brilliant man, but always living in our father's shadow. Tyler never understood why I left. "You're ruining your life," he said the last time we met. I didn't respond. Some things can't be explained when your heart knows what's right, but words fail to convey it. Boulder appeared before me, its familiar streets and wooden houses nestled among the trees. I pulled up in front of the family's large home, a 2-story mansion with a sprawling garden where I used to run and play as a child. The garage door was wide open, and I saw my father standing there wearing a checkered shirt, holding a wrench as he worked on an old truck. He looked up, catching my eye. No smile, no nod, just heavy silence as if I were a stranger. "Michael," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you're back." "For Mom," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "How is she?" He gestured toward the house. "The doctor says she needs rest. Cancer, stage 2. But she's tough, you know that." I nodded, brushing past him, feeling like I was walking through a stone wall. Inside, the faint smell of disinfectant lingered. My mother lay on the couch in the living room, much thinner than the last time I saw her. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, but her eyes still sparkled, as if the illness couldn't steal her spirit. "Michael, my boy," she said with a weak smile, reaching out to me. I knelt beside her, taking her hand. It was cold, but her grip was firm, as if she were trying to hold me there. "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner," I said, my voice hoarse. "Don't apologize," she whispered. "I just wanted to see you, and Tyler too. Our family needs to be together." I nodded, but I knew family was no longer a simple word. Tyler arrived that evening with his wife and their 5-year-old son, Ethan. Tyler looked older with a few gray strands in his hair, but his smile was as warm as ever. "It's been a while, big brother," he said, giving me a quick hug. Ethan ran over, wrapping his arms around my legs, shouting, "Uncle Mike," with excitement. I picked him up, feeling my heart melt. But when my eyes met my father's sitting at the head of the dinner table, I knew this meal wouldn't be easy. Dinner was tense. My mother tried to share old stories about our childhood camping trips, but my father ate in silence, his eyes occasionally flicking toward me as if he wanted to say something. Tyler, on the other hand, talked more than usual, as if trying to fill the void. "The company's expanding," he said eagerly. "We just signed a big deal with a partner in Nevada. Dad thinks this could be our breakthrough year." I nodded but said nothing. I didn't want to dredge up the past or spark conflict. But then my father spoke, his voice icy. "Are you going to ask about the company, Michael? Or are you still too busy with your Save the World projects?" The table fell silent. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. Tyler stopped chewing, his fork frozen in midair. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm doing my work, Dad. I have no intention of interfering with yours." "Of course," he said, his tone biting. "You're good at running away. You think you're noble for leaving, but you're just an ungrateful kid." "Walter," my mother interjected, her voice weak but firm. "That's enough." I stood, excused myself to my mother, and left the table. I didn't want to argue, didn't want to upset her. But as I stepped out into the backyard, I could feel my father's gaze burning into my back. I knew he'd never forgiven me, and perhaps I'd never forgiven him either. That night, I slept in my old room where photos of Tyler, my mother, and me from beach trips still hung on the walls. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay there thinking of my mother and all she'd sacrificed to hold this family together. I thought of Tyler, how he chose to stay with our father even though he likely knew the company's dark secrets. And I thought of my father, the man who was once my idol, now just a shadow consumed by ambition. The next morning, I decided to clean the garage to help my mother, a simple task to avoid facing my father. The garage was dusty, filled with old boxes, tools, and mementos from when my father still worked with his hands. While cleaning, I found an old metal box wedged under a pile of tires. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was an old hard drive, the kind the company used for data storage. A sticker on it bore the company logo and handwritten text, "Accounting, 2018 to 2020. My heart raced. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity won. I took the hard drive to my room and plugged it into my laptop. What I found made my blood run cold. The files detailed bribes sent to local officials, falsified reports to evade taxes, and worse, an internal email referencing a mining accident 6 years ago. A worker had died, but the company covered it up by compensating the family and suppressing the information. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like the world was collapsing around me. I copied the data onto a USB, my hands trembling. I didn't want to make a scene or destroy the family, but I knew from that moment, everything had changed. I placed the hard drive back where I found it, but deliberately left it slightly out of place so my father would know someone had touched it. I wanted him to know. I wanted him to feel the pressure just as I was feeling it. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. My mother was still lying on the couch, frail but managing a smile when she saw me bringing in coffee. "Did you sleep well, my boy?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I lied, saying I was fine, but her eyes seemed to see right through me. She was always like that, always knowing when I was hiding something. I sat beside her, sharing a few stories about my work in Denver, about the technical projects I was working on, but my mind kept drifting back to the hard drive. Those secrets, and my father. He appeared at the living room door wearing a clean shirt, his hair neatly combed, but there was something in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the usual anger, but a coldness, as if he was calculating something. "Michael," he said, his voice steady. "Come take a walk with me." I wanted to refuse, but my mother's hopeful gaze made me nod. We stepped out into the backyard where tall pine trees cast long shadows. The morning air was cool, but I felt stifled. My father walked ahead, hands in his pockets, his steps slow and deliberate, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "What did you find in the garage yesterday?" he asked, not turning to look at during me. My heart skipped a beat. I knew he'd noticed the hard drive had been moved. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Just cleaning up, Dad. The garage was a mess." He stopped and turned to face me. His eyes were sharp as knives. "Don't play smart with me, Michael. You think I don't know you've been rummaging through things?" I didn't answer right away. I knew he was probing, but I wasn't going to let him control the situation so easily. "If you're worried about what I found, why don't you just say it?" I replied, my voice low but firm. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You always think you're right, don't you? You think you can dig up the past and judge everything. But you don't understand, Michael. The world doesn't work the way you want it to." "Does your world work by covering up someone's death?" I blurted out, unable to hold back. The words hit like a bullet, and I saw his face harden. I knew I'd crossed a line. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, son. If you're smart, you'll forget what you saw. For the sake of all of us." I stood there, watching him turn and walk away, feeling as if a boulder was pressing down on my chest. His words weren't just a warning, they were a threat. And for the first time, I realized how far my father was willing to go to protect his secrets. I stood frozen in the backyard, the cold wind rustling through the pine trees, carrying the scent of resin and damp earth. But the air didn't clear my mind. Instead, it made me feel suffocated, as if the entire world was closing in around me. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. It wasn't safe. Not now, when my father had sensed that I knew too much. I returned to Denver the next morning, driving through winding roads, my mind in turmoil. My apartment was the same as always, small, tidy, with early morning light streaming through the window, highlighting a thin layer of dust on the bookshelf. I dropped my backpack, checked the USB in its hidden compartment. The documents on it were like a ticking bomb, and I knew if I wasn't careful it would explode, taking me and my family down with it. I sat at the table, opened my laptop, and tried to focus on work, a software project for a small Denver startup, but my thoughts kept drifting back to what had happened in Boulder. My father's eyes, his threat, and my mother, the only one keeping me tethered to the family, now lying there fighting cancer. I called David, my friend who's a prosecutor. I didn't tell him everything, just that I had some sensitive documents and needed advice. "What are you getting yourself into, Mike?" David asked, his voice full of concern. "If this is big, you need to protect yourself. Send me a copy of the data, let me take a look." I hesitated. Sending the data to David meant no turning back. My father would be investigated, the company would collapse, and my mother, I didn't know how she'd handle it. But if I stayed silent, I'd live with guilt for the rest of my life. I promised to send it to David later, but first, I needed time to think. The next few days in Denver, I tried to return to my normal routine. I went to work, met with clients, coded late into the night, but the unease never left me. I started noticing small details. A black truck parked longer than usual on the corner. A strange call with no one answering, and the feeling of being watched whenever I went out. I told myself I was being paranoid, but after that conversation with my father, I wasn't sure what was real and what was imagined. My 34th birthday was approaching, and I didn't plan anything special. A quiet dinner alone, maybe with a glass of wine and an old movie on Netflix, was my idea of a celebration. But then my mother called, her voice weak but filled with worry. "Michael, my boy, I know you like being on your own, but a birthday should be spent with family," she said, her voice trembling. "I worry about you all alone in Denver. It must be lonely. Invite Tyler and his family over, okay? I want you to be happy on your special day. I wanted to say I was fine, that I was used to the solitude, but hearing her voice, I couldn't refuse. She was sick, and every word she spoke felt like a plea not to drift further from the family. I took a deep breath, nodded even though she couldn't see, and promised to throw a small party with Tyler's family. After hanging up, I called Tyler to invite him to the birthday gathering. His house was about a 30-minute drive from mine, and I knew he'd never miss a chance to nudge me back toward the family's mining company. Your birthday, huh? Count us in. I'll bring Sarah and Ethan, he said, his voice enthusiastic. Ethan's been dying to see Uncle Mike. I smiled over the phone, but inside the unease lingered. Tyler was now my father's right-hand man. He supported every decision our father made, and I feared the two of them might be conspiring behind my back. The birthday arrived, a clear Saturday with sunlight streaming through my apartment window, brightening the room. I tidied up, stacked the technical books on the table, cleaned the kitchen, and even bought some balloons to make Ethan happy. Tyler, Sarah, and Ethan arrived in the afternoon bringing a small gift bag and bright smiles. Ethan rushed in, hugging my legs, shouting, "Uncle Mike, I brought cookies for you." I laughed, picking him up, feeling my heart lighten a little. Tyler clapped me on the shoulder and Sarah gave me a hug, saying she'd brought a recipe from my mother for my favorite casserole. We sat around the small kitchen table laughing and sharing stories. Tyler reminisced about the times we drove our mother crazy as kids, like when we set off fireworks in the backyard and nearly burned down the fence. Ethan giggled, his mouth full of cookie crumbs. I tried to relax, but every time I thought of my father, a chill ran down my spine. He didn't come, but I knew he had ways of controlling things from afar. Around 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I thought it might be a neighbor. But when I opened the door, a delivery man stood there, holding a large box wrapped in silver paper. "For Michael Grayson," he said, handing me a clipboard to sign. I opened the box, and inside was a chocolate birthday cake, covered in smooth frosting and decorated with intricate sugar flowers. A small card was attached with handwritten text. "Happy birthday, Michael," from an old friend. No specific name, but the handwriting looked vaguely familiar, like that of a former business associate of my father's. I frowned, a sense of unease rising, but I didn't want to ruin the mood in front of Tyler and Ethan. "Wow, that's gorgeous," Sarah exclaimed when I brought the cake in. "Who sent it, Mike?" "Probably an old friend," I said, trying to sound casual. "Not sure." Ethan bounced excitedly, demanding we cut the cake immediately. I smiled, but deep down I didn't want to touch it. I was on a diet, and though it was just an excuse, something felt off. I pushed the cake toward Tyler and Ethan. "You guys dig in. I'm cutting back on sweets," I said. Tyler laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're such an ascetic, Mike." He cut a big slice for Ethan, then took one for himself. Sarah declined, saying she wasn't a fan of chocolate, and I sat there, sipping water, watching the meat. Ethan devoured his slice, frosting smeared on his face, while Tyler teased that I was missing out on the best part. I laughed, but my eyes kept drifting to the cake, unable to shake the growing unease. The party went on into the evening, filled with Ethan's laughter and Tyler's stories. Sarah shared how she first met my mother and how she taught her to make cornbread. I tried to enjoy the moment, but the anxiety clung to me. When they left, I hugged Ethan tightly, promising to visit him soon. Tyler clapped my shoulder, saying, "It's been a while since we had this much fun, Michael. Thanks for inviting us." I nodded, but as I closed the door, I felt like I'd just walked through an invisible trap. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from my father. He rarely called me, and that day his voice was so gentle and intimate it gave me chills. "Did you have a good birthday, son?" he asked. I hesitated. "It was nice, Dad. I invited Tyler's family over, so it was lively." His tone shifted instantly, sharp and biting. "What did you just say? Tyler's whole family was there?" "Yeah, Mom said I should invite them for a family vibe, so I called." Before I could finish, he hung up abruptly. I stood there, phone in hand, confused. My eyes drifted to the leftover cake on the kitchen counter, and a horrifying thought flashed through my mind. No, it couldn't be. My father wouldn't. But then I remembered his eyes, his threat in the backyard. I knew he'd do anything to protect his secrets. About 30 minutes after my father's call, my phone rang again. This time it was Sarah, her voice trembling, barely controlled. "Ethan and Tyler, they're sick. They're in the hospital. Can you come right away?" My heart stopped. "What's wrong? What happened?" Sarah sobbed. "I don't know. After Tyler spoke to someone, he got scared and rushed Ethan to the hospital for tests. The doctors say it's poisoning, acute liver failure. Ethan, he's critical, Michael. Tyler's in a coma. Please, come now." I bolted out of the apartment, barely thinking. On the drive to the hospital in Boulder, I tried to piece it together. Ethan and Tyler, the cake, my father's words. I didn't want to believe it, but a part of me knew. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Sarah in the hallway, her eyes red, clutching Ethan's jacket. "They started vomiting this morning," she whispered. "The doctors say Ethan and Tyler are in critical condition. I'm so scared." I held Sarah's hand, trying to comfort her, but inside, rage and fear were erupting. I demanded to see the doctor, who confirmed that both Tyler and Ethan showed signs of severe poisoning, possibly from a potent toxin affecting the liver. "We're running tests," he said, "but their condition is very serious." The doctor's words cut into me like a knife. I looked at Sarah, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen, and I could see she was fighting to keep herself from breaking down. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but my throat tightened and no words came out. All I could do was stand there, gripping her hand, while my mind spun with images of the birthday cake and my father's voice over the phone. As I sat in the hospital hallway, head bowed, trying to piece together the fragments in my mind, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the corridor. My father, Walter Grayson, walked in. His gray suit impeccable, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes betrayed a tension I rarely saw. He approached Sarah, placing a hand on her shoulder, murmuring words of comfort I couldn't quite hear. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face, then turned away, leaving me and my father facing each other in the cold hospital hallway. "Michael," he said, his voice as icy as ever. "Are you okay?" I stared at him, a fire igniting in my chest. "Okay? How could I be okay when Tyler was in a coma and Ethan, a 5-year-old boy, was fighting for his life?" I stood up, stepping closer to him, my voice trembling with anger. "You know what's going on, don't you?" I said, keeping my voice low so Sarah wouldn't hear. "The cake. Your call this morning. What do you know about this?" My father frowned, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes before they settled back into calm. "What are you talking about, Michael? You think I had something to do with Tyler and Ethan getting sick? You're out of your mind." "Don't play dumb," I snapped, stepping closer until I could see the fine lines on his face. "That cake was sent to my house with a card from an old friend, and now my brother and my nephew are lying in there, poisoned. You think I'll believe this is a coincidence?" He looked at me, his eyes darkening, but he didn't flinch. "You're accusing your own father without evidence, Michael," he said, his voice cold as ice. "You think I'm a monster who would harm my own son and grandson? Do you really think I'm that evil?" His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe he couldn't do something so horrific. But then I remembered the hard drive, the documents about bribes, the covered-up accident, and his threat in the backyard. I recalled his tone on the phone this morning, the way he faltered. Was it all just a coincidence? No way. I didn't believe it was random chance. My father had to be involved. "You told me to forget what I found," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You said it was for the good of all of us, but whose good? Yours? The company's? Or the secrets you're trying to hide?" He shook his head, his lips tightening as if I'd insulted him. "You don't know what you're talking about, Michael. You're letting paranoia take over. I'm here because I'm worried about Tyler and Ethan, not to listen to your baseless accusations." I wanted to scream, to grab his collar and force him to confess. But I knew it was pointless. My father wasn't the kind of man to back down easily. And standing here in the hospital hallway with Sarah just a few meters away and my mother fading day by day at home, I couldn't let my emotions take over. I took a deep breath, looking straight into his eyes. "I'll find the truth," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "And if you're involved in this, I swear I won't let you get away with it." He didn't respond, just stared at me for a long moment, his gaze an impenetrable wall. Then he turned and walked toward Tyler's room, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding, anger and helplessness mingling in every breath. I left the hospital soon after, unable to bear the stifling atmosphere and my father's gaze. On the drive back to Denver, I drove like a man possessed, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. I wanted to believe my father couldn't have done it, that he wasn't the monster I feared, but every clue, the cake, the card, his voice, pointed to him. I couldn't let this slide, not with Tyler and Ethan in the hospital, and not when I knew I might have been the target. Back at my apartment, I checked the remaining birthday cake. It sat there in its silver box, some of the frosting melted, looking harmless but sending a shiver down my spine. I didn't touch it, carefully wrapping it in a sealed plastic bag and contacting a friend at a private lab in Denver. "I need you to test this," I said over the phone, my voice hoarse. "I suspect it's poisoned. Do it as fast as you can." My friend, a technician named Greg, heard the urgency in my voice and didn't ask many questions. "Bring it over now, Mike," he said. "I'll prioritize it." I drove to the lab, handing over the cake sample and the card. Greg looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "You okay? How serious is this?" "Very serious," I replied, not wanting to go into details. "Just test it. I need to know for sure." 3 days later, Greg called back. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the USB with my father's documents, when the phone rang. "Mike, sit down," Greg said, his voice trembling. "I tested the cake. There's poison in it. Amanitin, a highly toxic compound from mushrooms. Odorless, tasteless, and very hard to detect. If someone eats it, it attacks the liver, causing acute liver failure. The dose in the cake, it's enough to kill." My blood ran cold. Amanitin. I wasn't a chemist, but I knew about this toxin. It wasn't something you accidentally put in a cake. Someone had done this deliberately. And deep down, I knew that cake was meant for me. If I hadn't passed it to Tyler and Ethan, if I hadn't been avoiding sweets, I might be the one in the hospital or worse. "Thanks, Greg," I said, my voice dry. "Send me the full report, okay?" I hung up, slumping into a chair, my hands cradling my head. Images of Ethan giggling with frosting on his face, Tyler teasing me about my diet, all played like a nightmare. I wanted to scream, to smash everything, but I just sat there, trying to breathe. My father. Could he really have done this? Could he go that far to silence me? I looked at the USB on the table and a cold determination rose within me. I wouldn't let this be buried in silence. Not this time. I opened my laptop, plugged in the USB, and copied all the documents. The hidden accounting files, emails about bribes, reports about the fatal mining accident, along with Greg's lab report confirming the presence of amanitin in the cake. I compressed everything into an encrypted file and sent it to David, my prosecutor friend, through a secure channel. In the email, I wrote briefly, "David, this is everything I have. Documents from my father's company and the lab report on the poison in the birthday cake. My brother and nephew are in the hospital because of it. I trust you'll know what to do. Thank you." I hit send, feeling as if a weight had been lifted, but at the same time a new fear arose. Sending those documents to David meant I had officially put my father in the crosshairs of the law. His company, the empire he'd built over a lifetime, could collapse. And my mother. I didn't know how she'd cope when she learned the truth. But I couldn't stop. Not when Tyler and Ethan were fighting for their lives. I tucked the USB into a locked drawer and sat down, staring out the window. The Rocky Mountains loomed faintly in the twilight, but this time they brought no sense of peace. I thought of my mother, how she tried to hold our family together even as she grew weaker by the day. I thought of Tyler, my stubborn but warm-hearted brother, now lying motionless in the hospital. And Ethan, the little boy with a radiant smile, now facing death. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I couldn't do much, but I could trust David. He would uncover the truth. The days that followed, I tried to focus on work. The Denver startup I was working for was in a crunch phase, and I buried myself in lines of code, client meetings, anything to keep my mind off the hospital or my father. But every evening back in my apartment, I found myself checking my phone, waiting for updates from Sarah or David. Sarah called daily, updating me on Tyler and Ethan's condition. "Ethan's still critical," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "The doctors say his liver is badly damaged. Tyler, he still hasn't woken up, Michael. I don't know what to do." I drove to the hospital almost every day, visiting Sarah, Ethan, and Tyler. I brought coffee and sandwiches for Sarah, sat by Ethan's bedside, held his hand, and told stories about the camping trips Tyler and I used to take. Ethan didn't respond, but I kept talking, hoping that somewhere in his unconscious state he could hear my voice. Tyler lay in the next room, hooked up to all kinds of machines. Seeing my brother, once so full of life, now reduced to a shadow, broke my heart. Sarah often sat between the two rooms, splitting her time between her husband and son, her face gaunt, her eyes red. "Thank you for coming, Michael," she said once, her voice trembling. "I don't know how I'd get through this without you." "You're never alone," I replied, though I felt helpless myself. I wanted to do more, to find a way to save Ethan and Tyler, but I knew all I could do was wait. Wait for David, wait for justice. I avoided my father. He called a few times, leaving voicemails in a calm tone as if nothing had happened. "Michael, you okay? Your mother's asking about you." I didn't respond. I couldn't face him, not when I knew he might be behind it all. I focused on work, on hospital visits, and tried to stay calm. But every time I saw Ethan with tubes crisscrossing his small body, anger flared within me. I wanted to confront my father, to force him to confess, but I knew it was futile. He would never back down. Not to me. 3 weeks later, David called back. His voice was serious but tinged with excitement. "Mike, we've gone through the documents you sent," he said. "This is heavy stuff. Bribes, tax evasion, covering up an accident. Your father's company is deeply involved. We've opened a formal investigation. The FBI is stepping in." I sank into a chair, feeling both relief and dread. "What about the cake?" I asked, my voice hoarse. David hesitated. "We're tracing the order. The bakery's invoice led to a dummy account, but some transactions link back to a subsidiary of Grayson Minerals. We don't have direct evidence tying your father to the poison yet, but we're digging deeper. You did the right thing sending this to me, Mike." "Thanks, David," I said, but inside I wasn't sure how I felt. Justice was coming, but at what cost? How would my mother cope when she learned my father was under investigation? And if Tyler and Ethan didn't make it, would justice be enough to ease the pain? Over the following weeks, I heard about my father through the news and David. The federal prosecutor's office announced a major investigation into Grayson Minerals, with allegations of bribing local officials and tax evasion. My father's name appeared in headlines alongside words like corruption and scandal. The company's stock plummeted, and I knew the empire he'd built was crumbling. Once I saw him on TV standing in front of the company building, surrounded by reporters. He looked older, his face haggard but still defiant. "I'm innocent," he said into the microphones. "This is a witch hunt." I didn't believe him, not anymore. My mother called me once, her voice weaker than ever. "Michael, what's happening with your father?" she asked. "The news is saying terrible things. What do you know?" I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to break her heart. "Mom, I'm not sure," I said, "but I'm trying to do the right thing." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "I just want our family to be at peace." Her words cut like a knife. I wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but I couldn't. Not when Tyler and Ethan were still fighting for their lives and my father was facing the law. 2 months later, David called again. "Mike, we've got more evidence," he said. "Internal emails from your father's company link a former assistant of his to ordering the cake. There's no direct proof your father gave the order, but the assistant claims he was acting on instructions from the top. We're building the case." I nodded, though David couldn't see. "Thanks," I said. "Keep going." After hanging up, I slumped into a chair, staring out the apartment window. The Rocky Mountains loomed faintly in the twilight, but their beauty was now just a faded backdrop to the storm raging inside me. I had done the right thing by sending the documents to David, but the cost of the truth was becoming painfully clear. Tyler and Ethan were still in the hospital, my mother was growing weaker by the day, and my father, the man who once meant the world to me, was now facing the law. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to face what was coming, but I knew there was no turning back. The weeks that followed were an endless blur of long days split between work in Denver and visits to the hospital. I tried to maintain a normal routine, writing code, meeting clients, but my mind was always elsewhere. Every time I went to the hospital, I saw Sarah sitting between 2 rooms, one for Ethan, one for Tyler, her face gaunt as if she herself were fading away. Thankfully, a few weeks later, Ethan began showing signs of recovery. The doctors said he had passed the critical stage, but the damage to his liver was permanent. He would have to live with a strict diet, medications, and regular checkups for the rest of his life. As I held his small hand, feeling his tiny fingers grip mine, I couldn't stop thinking about his frosting-smeared smile on my birthday. I had passed him that cake, and now Ethan was paying the price for my decision. Tyler, however, wasn't as fortunate. One morning, as I sipped coffee in my apartment, Sarah called. Her voice was shattered, each word a struggle to get out. "Michael, Tyler's gone," she said, choking on sobs. "Last night, the doctors said he wouldn't make it. His liver, it stopped functioning." It felt like the floor collapsed beneath me. I don't remember what I said to Sarah, only that I mumbled some hollow words of comfort before hanging up. I sat there, staring at the wall, trying to grasp that my brother, the one who always teased me, always tried to make everyone laugh, was gone. Tyler, the only one in the family who ever tried to understand me, was now just a memory. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the pain was so immense it left me numb. I drove to the hospital holding Sarah as she sobbed in the hallway. We held a small funeral for Tyler a few days later at a funeral home near his house. My mother attended in a wheelchair, frail and weak, her eyes red but too dry to shed more tears. My father didn't show. He was under house arrest awaiting his hearing. Sarah held Ethan's hand, the boy looking small and fragile in his black suit, not fully understanding that his father was gone forever. I stood there, staring at Tyler's coffin, wondering if I could have done anything differently to prevent this. While I drowned in grief, David's investigation moved swiftly. One afternoon he called, his voice serious but resolute. "Mike, we have enough evidence to charge your father," he said. "Bribery, tax evasion, covering up the fatal mining accident. Everything's been verified. The FBI raided Grayson Minerals' offices and found more documents supporting the charges. As for the cake, we still don't have direct evidence linking your father to the poison, but the person who ordered it, a former assistant of his, claims he was acting on orders from the top. We're building the case to bring him to trial." "Thanks, David," I said, my voice hoarse. "Do what you have to do." Under the law, the charges my father faced, bribing federal officials, large-scale tax evasion, and concealing a workplace accident, could lead to years in prison. He could face up to 7 years for each charge, plus millions in fines. For the accident, if proven to be an intentional cover-up causing harm, he could face additional criminal charges. I wasn't a lawyer, but David made it clear that my father's chances of escaping were slim. Grayson Minerals, the company my father had spent his life building, began to collapse. Its stock hit rock bottom, losing over 80% of its value in just weeks. Major partners pulled out, contracts were canceled, and the press relentlessly covered the scandal. An article in the Denver Post called Grayson Minerals, an empire built on blood and corruption. I read those words and felt both bitterness and emptiness. My father had lost everything, his reputation, his power, and now his freedom, but it didn't bring Tyler back, didn't heal Ethan's liver, didn't ease my mother's suffering. I visited my mother after Tyler's funeral. She lay in bed weaker than ever, but her eyes still held a spark as if she were clinging to one last shred of hope. "Michael," she whispered, gripping my hand. "I know what you did. Those documents, you gave them to the police, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I had to, Mom. I couldn't let it go on." She was silent for a moment, then squeezed my hand tighter. "I don't blame you," she said. "But I wish our family didn't have to be like this." Her words cut like a blade. I wanted to apologize, to say I had no choice, but I just sat there, holding her hand, feeling her fragility in each shallow breath. I knew she didn't have much time left, and I feared the truth about my father would be the final blow to push her away. A month later, my father went to trial. I didn't attend, unwilling to see him in the defendant's chair, unwilling to hear his justifications. David told me my father remained composed, but his eyes lacked the usual arrogance. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison for bribery and tax evasion, with an additional 3 years for covering up the mining accident. There wasn't enough evidence to convict him for the poison in the cake, but David said the case remained open and they would keep investigating. Grayson Minerals officially filed for bankruptcy soon after. The mines were shut down, employees were laid off, and assets were seized to pay debts. I read the news and felt a strange void. That company had once been part of me, even though I'd left it long ago, but now it was nothing more than the ashes of ambition. I left Denver a few months later, unable to bear the memories that clung to me. Every street corner, every road, reminded me of the days when I was still part of the Grayson family, days before everything shattered. I chose a small town in Oregon called Astoria, where the Pacific Ocean crashes against rocky shores and the air carries the faint scent of sea salt. My new apartment sat on a small hill with windows overlooking the ocean where I could watch fishing boats drift by each morning. It wasn't a glamorous place, but it was somewhere I could breathe, somewhere I could try to start over. I found a job at a renewable energy startup working as a software engineer on offshore wind turbine projects. The work wasn't too demanding, but it kept my mind occupied. I wrote code, joined online meetings, and occasionally visited the port to check data from sensors. My colleagues were good, simple people who knew nothing about my past, and I liked it that way. They called me Mike, the quiet guy who likes black coffee, and I smiled, letting them think I was just an ordinary engineer with an ordinary life. But every evening back in my apartment, I faced myself. I kept a photo of Tyler and Ethan on my desk, taken during a camping trip a few years ago. Tyler was grinning, holding up a fish he'd caught, while Ethan, then 3 years old, sat on his shoulders, brandishing a stick like a sword. I looked at the photo and felt my heart tighten. Tyler was gone, and Ethan, though he survived, would never have a normal life. I called Sarah every week to check on him. "He's okay," she'd say, her voice still tinged with pain. "But he keeps asking about his dad. I don't know how to answer." I sent money to Sarah when I could, though she always refused. "You've done enough, Michael," she'd say. But I knew I hadn't. I was the one who passed that cake, the one who unwittingly pulled Tyler and Ethan into the crossfire between me and my father. I never said it to Sarah, but every time I looked into her eyes, the truth was there. My mother passed away not long after Tyler's funeral. She went peacefully in her sleep, as if she were too tired to keep fighting. I returned to Boulder for her funeral, standing before her coffin, feeling like I'd lost the last piece of my family. My father wasn't allowed to attend. He was serving his sentence in a federal prison in Colorado. I didn't know if he was informed of her death, and I didn't care. He'd chosen his path, and that path had destroyed everything. Before leaving Boulder for the last time, I visited the old family home where I grew up. The house was up for sale, its contents cleared out, leaving only empty walls and echoes of memories. I stood in the living room, where my mother had once lain, where she'd held my hand and begged for our family to stay together. I found a small box in a closet containing letters my mother wrote to me and Tyler when we were kids. One letter, written in her trembling handwriting, read, "Michael, my boy, you're stronger than you know. Don't let pain define you." I folded the letter, tucked it into my pocket, and left the house without looking back. In Astoria, I lived a quiet life. I walked along the beach on weekends, listening to the waves and reflecting on what had happened. I no longer hated my father. The anger had cooled, replaced by a deep sadness. Walter Grayson, once my idol, was now just a man imprisoned by his own ambition. He was serving a 12-year sentence, and with his health declining, I wasn't sure he'd live long enough to be released. The press had stopped mentioning him, and Grayson Minerals was now just a case study in business failures. But I couldn't forget, not because I wanted revenge, but because of what I'd learned from all of this. I once thought the truth would set me free, that exposing my father would bring justice. But justice, I realized, doesn't always bring peace. It only puts things in their rightful place, as I wrote in a letter to my mother. And sometimes the cost of truth is a loss that can't be undone. I started keeping a journal, not to document the story, but to understand myself. In its pages, I poured out my thoughts about Tyler, Ethan, my mother, and my father. I wrote about the lessons I wished I'd learned sooner. One was that ambition, unchecked, can turn people into monsters. My father let greed guide him, and he paid the price with his family. But the biggest lesson was about forgiveness, not for my father, but for myself. I'd blamed myself for passing the cake, for leaving the company, for not preventing the tragedy. But I realized I couldn't control everything. I could only do what was right, even when it hurt. If I could say something to anyone reading this story, it would be, cherish your family, but don't let it hold you back when you know what's right. The truth might tear you apart, but silence is crueler. And above all, live a life you won't regret when you look back. I'm still learning how to do that day by day. One morning I stood on the Astoria shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks. I took out my mother's letter and reread its final lines, "Don't let pain define you." I folded it back, letting the sea breeze ruffle my hair. I didn't know if I'd ever find complete peace, but I knew I was trying. And maybe that was all I could do.